Games that have always appealed to me and held my interest were ones that had an underlying concept behind its narrative that contextualizes all of the events of its story and its characters. Examples include Elden Ring being contextualized by the cyclical nature of time, or Persona 3 being contextualized by death. In the case of Three Houses, its three routes and their respective themes can sometimes obfuscate the overarching theme of the game because of how the plot is driven by these more immediate themes. But, when looking at how the game starts and what contextualizes the immediate conflict of Edelgard's revolution, the theme of historical relativism immediately reveals itself. I normally don't do this, but please subscribe if you haven't already. I really worked hard on this video, and it would mean a lot. Also, if you want to see more stuff like this, that would be the best way to do it. The first thing we're greeted with when starting a new game of Fire Emblem Three Houses is the Battle of the Taltian Plains between Seiros' Nabateans and Nemesis' humans. We're only given a glimpse into this moment and can glean an essential narrative of the contemporary zeitgeist of Fodlan, that the game's narrative is set within. We catch the tail end of the battle and learn that Seiros is fighting the malicious-looking Nemesis in retaliation for what she views as an atrocity. We then see her maniacally stab him to death before neurotically placing Nemesis' sword to her face, referring to it as her mother, and telling it that they're safe now. The game then shows a series of images from what we can understand to be history before placing us within Sothis' domain, where she is suddenly awakened by the presence of Byleth and the subsequent call of present conflict.
Oh my. What could have brought you here?
This setup clearly establishes all the events of the story within the context of the past and the primary theme of violence being fundamental to this world and its history. It's later revealed through various routes that the Nabatean and Agarthan conflict was a messy affair that wasn't exactly as clean as the church pretended. The books within the Abyss Secret Library claim that the Agarthans predated Sothis and had been technologically more advanced than other humans and had been using this advantage to exploit and mistreat them. After this, Sothis and her children arrived and sought to protect the weak from exploitation. The Nabateans fought the Agarthans and established the rule of Sothis. However, after dealing with the Agarthans, Sothis needed to rest. The director of Three Houses himself actually went over this lore in a Famitsu interview. In response to what motivated Nemesis' attack on Xanadu, Kusakahira recounts how, in Fodlan, the Nabateans, the people who could turn into dragons, were scattered across Fodlan and ruled over the land as both dragons and gods. But the Agarthans, the so-called people who slither in the dark, hated the Nabateans and planned the attack to challenge the status quo. They made plans to teach humanity how to make powerful weapons out of the Nabateans' corpses, and the human Nemesis carried it out. As for how it turned out for the humans and their new power, they sought power, killed dragons larger than themselves, stripped them for raw materials, and created stronger weapons. That's how it goes. And that's how Fodlan's 10 elites came to be. And then Seiros raised an army and subjugated Nemesis and the 10 elites, and later, as the victor, Seiros rewrote history, making it the current history of the Church of Seiros. Basically, we emphasize that history is really just the domain of the victors. That's why, over the entirety of this work, there are so many people who lie about history, and even the accounts of the books in the library can't be trusted at all. Then, responding to the question of why Rhea left for the 10 elites as heroes, he elaborates that it's because from the human side, Nemesis and the 10 elites were thought of as heroes. When you're ruling over humanity, you can't exactly create a history that completely ignores humanity's feelings. So the idea is she held them up as heroes while rewriting other parts to be more convenient for her. However, when Seiros and her friends tampered with history, they weren't doing it for the sake of ruling over humanity, but rather for the purpose of minimizing war as much as possible and making it easier to preserve harmony. Like you see in the underground library, they even suppressed the advancement of civilization when it was getting too fast. There's a reason for that too, but that's a secret. In Edelgard's in-game description, one of her notable likes is alternative readings of history. Since Edelgard is the driving force of change within all the various routes' narratives, it shows that her different perspective in history really separates her from the status quo. A status quo set by Rhea, who attempted to knowingly rewrite history to serve the establishment of her church so that the Nabateans and humans may live in peace. Finally, the Agarthans have their own interpretation of history that views themselves as noble perpetual victims that are being oppressed by an alien power and are fighting for freedom from the oppression of the goddess. All of these interpretations imply vastly different things, but they are all rooted within the traditional framework of force being necessary for authority to exist. Hubert actually directly states this relationship when considering his feelings towards the church in his A support with Byleth.
The goddess failed to properly govern this world. Those with power must use it wisely. Is that not a teaching of the Church of Seros? It's absurd to preach to others what you cannot practice yourself. Yes. It is our humanity that pushes us to step up and take the lead should the need arise. That is not the case for inhuman creatures with lifespans well beyond our own. We must fight to preserve what makes us human.
Hubert essentially describes that wisely using the power endowed to oneself is a core dogma of the Church of Seros. What's interesting is that he goes even further and declares that the Church has failed to fulfill this promise because they led improperly. He then ends his rumination on the Church by establishing that it is human nature to step up and take power if they need to, in contrast to the Nabateans. Hubert's thoughts showcase a lot of the conceptual baggage that was carried over by the Nabatean-Agarthan conflict, and remains within the framework of authority being justified through power or violence. One final perspective on history is Dimitri's, sometimes, where he views all perceptions of events as equally valid, and believes that to exercise violence towards changing the world is unethical. These are all engaging interpretations of Fodlan, and they drive much of the conflict within the story. It's no surprise that Claude spends the whole game attempting to unravel the mess of history in Fodlan to understand and appreciate it in a different way, since he's a third party. In this way, the Agarthans serve as a sort of primeval force of domination, in that they feel justified in subjugating and abusing those that are weaker than them, because they can. Sothis and the Nabateans then came to Fodlan in a nondescript way and fought the Agarthans for the sake of creating a world where the weak would no longer be abused by the Agarthans. This is the exact ideological conflict that's expressed in Dimitri and Edelgard's discussion before his invasion of Enbar. They start their discussion by addressing the practical considerations of war, but they quickly get to the epistemic root of their conflict, the cycle of the strong dominating the weak.
You cannot change the cycle of the strong dominating the weak with a method like that.
You're wrong. That very cycle is exactly what I have devoted my life and my power to destroying. If after all of this, you believe the weak will still be weak, that is only because they are too used to relying on others instead of on themselves.
Yes, perhaps someone as strong as you are can claim something like that. But you cannot force that belief onto others. People aren't as strong as you think they are. There are those who cannot live without their faith, and those who cannot go on once they have lost their reason for living. Your path will not be able to save them. It is the path of the strong, and so it could only benefit the strong.
Edelgard claims that her war will break the cycle and will only be impeded by what she sees as unjust conditioning by the Agarthans. Dimitri contends that some people are essentially weak and falter within such a system. Their positions are a continuation of the fundamental conflict of the Agarthans and Seros. As I said earlier in the video, the history of the Nabateans and the Agarthans reflects the rule of the strong, in that both groups' authority was established and perpetuated with violence. Edelgard and Dimitri both see the conditions under which such a cycle is ended differently. Edelgard believing that the elimination of the immediate exploitation achieves such an end, while Dimitri believes meta-historically that to abstain from conditions of violence that traditionally propped up authority is the only way. These are the two different ideologies born of their different readings of history that continue the tradition of conflict until one of them ultimately loses. History has always been a profoundly interesting subject to me because of its ability to preserve the state and sensibilities of the past. When I was younger, I always viewed these two aspects as distinct and factual, but but I've come to understand and appreciate the fact that any interpretation of history requires referencing facts and biases in simultaneity to come closest to the truth. Through the muddy and complicated history of Fodlan, Fire Emblem Three Houses illustrates the importance of regarding both facts and sensibilities when piecing together the past of Fodlan. Taking people like Rhea and Edelgard at their word creates an erroneous sense of righteousness when approaching the events of the game, when in reality, Fodlan's heterogeneous multiplicity of information creates a complex and realistic world that resembles the history of our own. In the case of Fire Emblem Three Houses, history seems to serve as much more of a mirror than anything else. The characters' ideals and actions are contextualized by Fodlan's history. However, what the characters know and value about history are all dependent on their own sensibilities. Much like in real life, a robust reading of history requires an understanding of the relative process that any individual must come to understand it in. Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching, and if you did, please be sure to let me know by giving me a like or leaving a comment with some of your thoughts on it. If you're new here, welcome, and please subscribe if you want to see more. Anyway, thanks again, and until next time.